What made you dislike someone immediately? Story 1. I was the only woman at my last job, and I was second in seniority in our little crew. I did almost all the training of the new people. All the younger guys loved me because I was like a mom to the crew. Always had snacks and would always listen when they were having a problem or whatever. My biggest problems were usually with guys in their mid-30s. In the morning meeting, the bosses told everyone their job assignments. As we were walking out of the shop, he said, "Yeah, like I'm gonna listen to some snot-nosed 24-year-old chick," to one of the older guys. The older guy looked at him and said, "I suggest you say that to her face, and if I were you, I wouldn't make her mad. We will always like her more than we will ever like you." He lasted about 3 weeks. Still disliked that guy. My favorite, though, was when my husband and I were working together for a bit. He worked there before, and we needed help, so he would come in and lend a hand. The one guy I was having issues with at the time said that I was a huge B, and he didn't understand why they didn't just fire me aside from my breasts. He used a different word. He thought the new guy would agree with him and be his friend. My husband listened to him all day and didn't say a word. At the end of the day, when the entire crew was filling out time cards, he looks at the guy and says, "Thank you for telling me all day how much of a B my wife is. You're right though, she does have a great rack." This is an S-tier husband right here. Seriously, the incredible restraint and patience your husband has should be studied. Story 2. Some people might say I'm an a-hole, but I just tell it how it is. 99% chance that they are an asshole that I don't want to be around. This was my father. He always said, "I'm just telling the truth." You need to hear this from someone who can be objective, stuff like that to justify the most vile things he'd say. That, in combination with tough love, somehow made him think he was the greatest. Turned out he was not, but to his last day he maintained the opinion that he never did anything wrong and everything he said or did always resulted in great things. My mom would say, "Can't blame him, his father was way worse," as if that somehow made everything go away. I'm really glad younger generations are taking abuse seriously and are trying to fix the resulting mental health issues, rather than diving into drugs and more abuse, and passing down the torch to the next generation. Brutally honest people never seem to be brutally honest about positives. They never bluntly state that someone looks nice, or that they did something well. It's always blunt criticism and negativity. You hit the nail on the head. These people view life through a negative filter. The only thing they comprehend is something negative. The people who describe themselves as brutally honest people are simply stating that they couldn't bother having a filter, don't care about who they offend or how often, and feel a sense of entitlement in dishing out criticism and negativity. Having a personality that demonstrates true compassion, being emotionally connected, and being able to focus on the positive elements in any given situation is a form of art. These people are a joy to have in your life. I never let people like that fool me. It's extremely easy to tell who just gets off by having a nasty personality. We all know you were a middle school bully. Story 3. He said, "I hate that our boss is a chick. They make the worst bosses." It was lunch break on his first day on the job. This was over 20 years ago. He didn't work there for long, and that was far from the worst thing he ever said. He was a bad person and proud of it. He called himself Uncle Bully to his nephews and nieces. A new hire at my old job, which only had 8 employees, says in the middle of the lobby to me, "That secretary has a nice rack, bro. You ever hit that?" And he says it loud enough that the secretary hears him. She comes out and I introduce him to the owner of the company with the nice rack as she rips up his paperwork and kicks him out. He left and then called for a second chance. "Oh, he wants a second chance. This time he'll look over his shoulder before saying nasty things, he swears." Story 4. She showed up to a little get-together and the person who invited her said they would be taking bets on who could sit with her for more than 30 minutes. $10 per person. Winner kept the pot. I assumed they were just being rude and planned to tell her of her friend's plans as soon as she showed up. She walked in, looked at me and scoffed and asked if the gray car outside belonged to me. I said yes. She told me that with the money that car cost, I could have bought something nicer. Okay, well, whatever. I went to get a drink and sat and watched the crowd gather around her. I already didn't like her, but she went on to tell everyone about how she could never date someone who had a crappy credit score or couldn't pay their vehicles off after buying it. Then someone who wanted to quit the contest asked for a cigarette, and she opened up her purse and showed everyone a fresh pack of smokes. Then she told everyone why she doesn't smoke and why anyone who asks for a cigarette is either too broke to buy them or doesn't plan ahead of time. The guy asked her for one of her cigarettes. She said no and put them back in her purse. She also talked about all the cars that she bought. Basically, her parents would co-sign for her and then pay the car off to build her credit, and she would give them just a few thousand to pay them back. She was nuts and wouldn't stop talking. I disliked her, but was also fascinated with her. She was super weird. There were like 15 to 20 people there and most entered the contest. I think the pot got around to $120. The winner was just some guy who I didn't know. He spent the money getting everyone McDonald's and beer, so he was pretty cool. She was about 22 or 23. She had just finished getting her high school diploma because she had dropped out to make money, according to her. I think she sold some milkshake things and fitness plans with an MLM. MLM stands for multi-level marketing, aka pyramid schemes for those who don't know. I'm not sure what happened to her. She wasn't my friend, but she did show up to a few parties I was at and she seemed calmer. She used to bring her own bottle of liquor and wouldn't share, which was kind of funny because on one occasion they caught her filling up her bottle with a bottle of Jack that someone had brought and left on the kitchen counter, but she swore that all she drank was Hennessy and Fireball. Story 5. I was talking to a girl in college and she made some remark like, yeah, like when you test your boyfriend to make sure he loves you, and I just remember thinking, you seemed so normal. Yeah, if someone I'm dating did that, I'd hope to fail. Very petulant. I once knew someone who tested her boyfriend by falsely accusing him of cheating with the belief that on the off chance it was true, she would have saved herself trouble. If she was false, then it'd remind him that she had her eye on him and make him pander to her more. No part of her seemed to even consider nor care that being accused of cheating was a pretty awful thing. Here's the thing. If you're incredibly insecure, that's okay. That happens. But that doesn't give you the right to play with someone's head. A lot of people seem to be able to convince themselves that this isn't toxic, that it's some type of very intense love. But it always comes down to two very simple things. One, your partner has given you reasons not to trust them, and you need to separate. Or two, your partner has given you no reason not to trust them, but you don't trust them anyway and you need to separate. Story 6. I started my PhD a few months ago, and one of the common starter conversations with postgraduates you just meet is, what is your thesis about? Well, I get asked the question first after describing my dissertation theme. The other guy goes, oh, I see, well mine is actually important, with a very condescending tone. For people who want to know, here's a brief overview of my thesis. I aim to detect corrosion, specifically rust, using electrochemical sensors in nuclear plants and nuclear contaminated areas. That's got to be in the top 5% of usefulness for dissertations. The guy you met is even worse than I thought before. Story 7. I met one of my new colleagues at a barbecue that was being hosted by our work. I, a man, drove with another coworker, a woman, and a friend of mine, so we arrived together. When I was alone for a moment, this guy, whom I've never spoken to before, comes up next to me and says, yo dude, you hitting that? While gesturing to my friend. I said, no, and she also has a boyfriend. He was exaggeratedly upset over this. He got fired 2 years later for sexually harassing an intern. A guy asked me, why do you talk to girls like they're dudes? You'll never get laid like that. I was sleeping with the woman he was referring to. Pretty sure he was jealous and knew the whole time. Just wanted to throw an insult out because she wasn't into him. Your super secret pickup method was to treat her like a human being. There are still a surprising amount of men that don't understand they have a huge thing in common with women. Being human. Crazy, right? Story 8. When they talk negatively about someone else in a very judgy way. There was this mom in my daughter's school who seemed to know everyone. She talked to me and she spoke so bad about these people. Then moments later, I saw her interacting in a friendly way with those that she was just judging. My eyes rolled so much I could see my brain telling me not to get involved with her. And I was right, because by the time the school year ends, her friends hated her and they were talking behind her back too. There's someone at my work who was on leave when I started. When she came back, the first words out of her mouth were literally gossip. I was cordial with her, but I didn't ever have any kind of respect for her because of that. Months later, she received a promotion to go to another department. The week before she was supposed to transfer, she acted up a couple of times. One of those incidents involved her being very hostile with a trainee, and that trainee went straight to my boss and told him what happened. I didn't go to my boss about those because I didn't have to. Boss pulled me in and asked me my side of the story, and I was honest about what I saw her do. She could have lost her promotion, but she didn't. However, she believes I went and tattled on her on my own volition. This was 1.5 years ago, and ever since then she has spread gossip about me. Surprise, surprise. She told someone that I was trying to, and I am quoting here, dim her sparkle, and I was apparently trying to sabotage her promotion. Why would I try to sabotage her promotion? I am in leadership. I already got mine. I already earn more than she does. Her promotion moves her very far from me. Story 9. The new neighbor who, after introducing himself, pointed to his chest and said, instant a-hole, just add beer. That's what the family says. Nah, we're not gonna be neighbor pals. When people claim to be an a-hole, believe them. Reminds me of the neighbor who walked past my house as I was moving in and told me to shut up when I said hello. They also lodged multiple noise complaints against me for using power tools in my garage with the door open, and recently accused me of blowing snow from my driveway onto hers. There's a whole other house between hers and mine. I would need one powerful snowblower to cross 2 entire yards and land on her driveway. Story 10. This girl told me she had 2 siblings and asked how many I had. I told her I had about 10 siblings, but that I only associate with my twin now. She makes a disgusted face and tells me, and I quote, "Geez, your mom should close her legs. I bet you don't even share a father with all of them." I just told her she was a B and walked away. I didn't want to respond to the actual statement because out of those 10 siblings, the only full-blood relative I had was my twin. 6 were half-siblings, 3 were step-siblings, and 1 was adopted. I think that whole conversation lasted about 30 seconds. It was supposed to be a simple icebreaker, and that single question told me everything about her personality and who she was. I'm glad you told her off, although I think people who go around being openly nasty take pride in it like some weird badge of honor. Disgusting. I'm completely flabbergasted that she felt so confident in assuming your mom gave birth 10 times. Using context clues, I think it's pretty obvious that your dad has kids with other women. It only takes having 3 or 4 kids for a woman to pee her pants when she sneezes. I'm sorry, common sense is just so easy to have. Please like and subscribe if you made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the video and have a wonderful day. Story 11. Meet your teacher day before my kid started kindergarten, and this other parent literally bragged that her kid was completely illiterate, couldn't stand being read to, and she hated reading too. As a teacher, I can tell you who my least favorite parents are every year on day 1. It's not the conservative parents or liberal parents. It's not the Christians or the pagans. It's the parents who tell me they don't read or they hate to read. One of the go-to questions I ask the get-to-know-you time is if they've read anything interesting over the summer. I get parents who tell me about fun beach reads or news articles. Some have read hippie mindfulness parenting books on spiritual self-help books. All those parents are just fine. The ones who say I don't like to read are always the hardest parents to work with. Their kids don't do homework. They look down on the academic concepts I'm trying to teach. They roll their eyes at parent-teacher meetings when I talk about the importance of experimental education or involved learning. The crossover between kids who don't take school seriously and kids with a parent that tells me they don't read or hate reading is nearly an identical group of kids. Shockingly, the kids who grow up in homes that hate literacy are difficult students to teach. My dad hates to read, but when I was a kid, he would fake enjoying it to be a good influence. He would even carry books around and pretend to read them. I thought he was insane when he finally admitted he never actually read any of the books. Honestly, it probably did make me look positively on reading, and I still love to read today. That's amazing, that he acknowledged something about himself that would reflect poorly on his kids and took direct action against it. I can't imagine something more boring than staring at a book I hate and pretending to read it, and then maintaining the illusion for years. What a guy. Story 12. There was a new guy at work. He was super fake, being overly excited and overly comfortable with everyone in the first minute. He was calling everyone mommy and papi, and was very overly touchy. We were almost all Hispanics there, and everyone was uncomfortable. On his first phone call of the day, he hung up cursing, and he was taking it super personally that someone hung up on him. This is a daily occurrence in customer service. After about 6 months, I put in my 2 weeks notice solely because I couldn't work next to or with him anymore. He would also get really gossipy and personal. My boss rejected my notice and transferred him. He couldn't stand the guy either. No one could. People who try to force best friend vibes with everyone have 100% turned out to be creeps or psychos in my life. No chill at all. We don't know each other, and that's fine. We don't need inside jokes on the first day. I'm not literally your spirit animal. Always comes off so transactional, like if they're your best friend, they can get whatever they want from you. No, let it happen naturally. If we vibe, we vibe. If we don't, cool. Story 13. I worked for 8 years servicing communications equipment on site. 5 of those years, I managed a department of my company with 40-ish technicians working for me. When oil was found in our area, we got so busy we could barely even find time to think. Most of my team were pulling 12-plus-hour days, 6 days a week, and we were struggling to hire people quick enough. One day, the CEO texted that a new manager was starting today, and he had assigned this one to be my assistant manager, which was something I desperately needed. I was dirty from my previous job and swung by the store to pick him up and take him to one of our sites where he would be doing paperwork and learning the job. The moment he got in my truck, he immediately started complaining. He started telling me about how everything we were doing was wrong and how the department manager, me, was a total moron and he would have my job within a few months. He clearly thought I was one of the techs he was going to manage, so I just sat and mostly listened. He obviously didn't know anything about my industry. Every time he would say something wrong, I would try to politely interject and he'd either backtrack or insist that I was trained wrong and that things were going to change. When we got to the site out in the middle of the Texas desert, he complained about the layer of of dust on everything and decided his first act as assistant manager was to order me to clean the entire site top to bottom. We entered my maintenance shop where I sat down at my desk, then the guy continued to complain about anything he could think of, then chastised me for sitting down at the manager's desk instead of starting the cleanup of the site. I told him I needed to make an important phone call, so he wandered around the shop for a bit, occasionally imitating a vomit sound or saying things like, "Oh my god," presumably due to the dust. I called for a taxi to pick him up, filled out a notice of termination, and when he wandered back to my desk, I handed it to him. He looked absolutely shocked. Then he defiantly protested that only the CEO could fire him. I clarified, "And the department manager, right?" He sheepishly nodded, so I stuck my hand out for a handshake and introduced myself. I'm not gonna lie, that story made me feel really good inside. Story 14. I was standing in a Tim Hortons line. I always liked that locale. The staff were friendly, they knew I came with multiple orders for everyone in my office. I'm only saying this because it's relevant. The staff are all people of color, while I am white. This old white guy leans over to me and says, "Aren't there any white-owned businesses anymore?" Shocked, I just said, "Yeah," and moved away from him. I saw that one of the women behind the counter must have heard him because she was just staring tiny daggers at him. I hoped she messed up his order. I just don't understand these older people. First, they complain that people of color are lazy and need to get jobs, quote unquote, and then when they have jobs, they complain about that too. Just say you're racist and get out of the store. Story 15. Years ago, my ex-husband and I went to see a movie with an older colleague of his. Before the movie, we had dinner at a chain restaurant/steakhouse type place. The staff on the floor were all 20-ish. I never met this man before, but in the first few minutes of sitting down and looking at the menu, he very confidently told us how he came there a lot and flirted with the female staff because they loved the attention. The best part? His daughter worked there. All I could think of was how I would cringe myself through the floor if I was 20 and my 50-year-old dad came into my place of work and perved on my coworkers, because he didn't understand that they only put up with him because they're paid to do so. My grandpa would come into the restaurants that I worked in. I usually was his server, but once someone else got his table, my coworkers would fight to take him. My grandpa was a funny dude that left enormous tips and joked with everyone around him that was cool with it. I remember I had told him about one of my coworkers having a rough time. He came in, specifically requested her, and then left her a $100 bill as a tip. When I got home, he asked if she had gotten the tip. Of course, she had, and then broke down hugging me, telling me that my grandfather was the best person she'd ever met. She wasn't wrong. Story 16. I once met a woman who told me she hates women and has no female friends because women are too much drama and she's just one of the guys. I'm one of the guys. Oh, you mean all women hate you? Wonder why. As a guy, we don't like those either. There are just some women who prefer the company of men and get along better with them. People who aren't girly girls or whatever. That's cool. Then there are people who need to tell you about it. Those are the ones that other women can't even stand to be around and lose every friend they make. When I worked in a medical office, one of the receptionists ranted about how she hated having girls, and boys were so much better because girls were so dramatic. Well, yes, if they have a mother with that attitude, I can see why. And now it shocks me how many people will straight up tell a pregnant woman, "Oh, I hope it's a boy, girls are so much harder." Hey, maybe girls are harder because they're born to live among people who think like this. I can't help but to think the moms that say their daughters were harder to raise than their sons are just holding their daughters to higher unfair standards. It's probably a generational thing. Maybe her mom said the same thing about her and her brothers, but that just makes it worse because they should know how it feels to be spoken about like that. Story 17. Last night, I was at a local pool competition and went to introduce myself to my second round opponent. We shook hands and his first words to me were, "We can shake, bro," followed by, "I hope you like banter." He then proceeded to talk shit about every aspect of my game. The worst part was, he was actually good at pool, so it just seemed like he was generally a miserable guy. Some of his other opponents got it a lot worse than I did. Highlight of the night was when the competition host basically yelled in his face, "Everyone in this room hates you," which received a round of applause. He didn't seem to understand why that was. The competition is 90% regulars that are there every week. This was this guy's first time playing there. He knew no one except for the couple of mates he brought. He ended up losing the final, which received more of a response than the host yelling at him. Banter is cool and all, but when you can't read the room, haven't established a proper connection with the opponent yet, and talk in a way that makes it seem like you mean it, you're just a socially awkward person with main character syndrome. Story 18. It always rubs me the wrong way when I meet someone for the first time and they start an opportunity to wedge in a bullet point from their resume, or an impressive fact about their life. Like the people who meet you and say, "OMG, I had those same sunglasses when I was an undergrad." It's not about the sunglasses now, is it, Karen? You want me to ask you where you did your undergrad so that you can then tell me where you went to grad school. This place is just like a cafe I used to go to in Paris. Great, so happy that Paris got to experience you. Shoot, I'll have to use Apple Pay. I left my wallet in the Porsche. Anyone who calls their car by the make or model is a huge tool. I'm not saying everyone needs to start with small talk and build from there, and I'm not saying everyone I meet has to talk about me or they're dead to me, but if you're the type of person who leads with talking about how great you are, good for you. I'm excited for our conversation to end. Story 19. We had just moved into a new house. An older gentleman, he was 65 and I was 35 at the time, came across the street towards me and stuck out his hand. I shook it and he said, "We love new neighbors, as long as they're white." Oof. Reminds me of when my parents put their house on the market a few years back and a neighbor across the street they barely talked to came over and started saying how sad she was to see that they were moving. My mom said something about how she'd make sure to find her some good new neighbors, to which Susan from across the street replied that she's sure that she would, as long as they didn't sell to any black people. According to my mom, those last two words were a barely audible whisper, as if some black people were hiding in the bushes, just waiting to pounce on a house being up for sale. From that day forward, Susan from across the street had her nickname changed to the much more brief racist Susan. My mom also said that had any black families put an offer on the house that was a little below what they were hoping for, she would have been tempted to take the offer just to spite racist Susan. Thanks for watching until the end. Please leave your story in the comments. I would also love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.